Hello and welcome back. Man, am I excited to talk about what we have today. Today's episode is obviously sponsored by LaCroix. Just kidding, we do not have any sponsors. This is a sponsor-free zone, unbiased, and not paid for by the big corporations, at least for now. So, today I want to talk about something very important. And what I have to share with you is, to be completely honest, horrifying. And when you hear it, you may be a little bit shocked. Now, did you know that, now mind you, this is the New Patients Now podcast, and so everything that we talk about is how to get more new patients, how to treat them well so they want to come back, and ultimately that when they come in the office and they do come in for that first time and they think about coming back, right, they have a positive mindset around exactly that. And if they need anything that you offer, right, they're more willing to do it because of the experience you've provided, and we've really lined things up well to best serve those patients. But, when you actually look at some of the numbers, right, about what is going on inside of practices, and you ask yourself, well, why are doctors struggling to make payroll? Why are team members frustrated? Why are the patients not just in love with the concept of coming to your office? Well, some of these statistics might make that a little more clear. Did you know that only 68% of phone calls are answered in the average dental office? Did you know that only 42% of those calls that get answered, if they're new patients, actually convert into a scheduled appointment? And of those people who come in, right, so 68% get answered, so you lose 32%, and then 42% convert of the, 68%, okay? And then only 48% of those new patients that come into the practice actually reappoint themselves after like a 30% no-show rate. So what we want to tackle today is how to move from the average, the expectation of what the patients are getting elsewhere, into the higher levels, into what we would call a practice that is executing at a gold standard level. Okay, and we have to begin where the patient begins, right? And I believe in past episodes I have talked about this concept of like the new patient pipeline and really assessing what's going on along their journey in your office and what you want to be able to assess, right? So today, right, it's about opening your eyes to a few things, showing you maybe some areas of your practice that you might not be paying attention to, and then you have to do the work to go figure out like what's actually going on in your practice, all right? So let's start with the first thing, right? So if I am a patient and I would like to come to your practice, right, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this, right, this phone here. I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to look up best dentist or best orthodontist or best chiropractor, right, near me. All right. So I'm going to type that in. And all right, looks like I'm going to get a few people who've paid for some SEO, paid for some ads, right? A lot of sponsored options, right? Well, there's my dentist. Nice way to show up. And every time I see that little sponsored thing, right, that means that the doctor who runs the practice is paying to show up at the top, okay? So if you know anything about how much that costs, you will know that it's not exactly cheap, especially for the sponsored spots, right? The organic ones, sometimes you can pull off a little bit better. But, right, so this guy that I'm looking at the top of the list, who knows? He could be paying $4, $5, $6, $7, I don't know, $10,000 a month to make sure he shows up at the top every single time, right? But the unfortunate truth is that that doctor who's sitting at the top of the sponsored page may have no idea that only 68% of the people who see that, who click on that, who go to call, does anyone even answer the phone? You see, if I'm that patient, which I am, right? I am a patient, and I go look for that, right? The beauty of Google and all the things that we can find on it is it's using my location, it's finding somebody near me. I could call them right now, But if I'm one of the 32% of people, 1/3 of the people who call that practice and no one answers the phone, well, what do? I just scroll right past them and I hit the next one. And if they don't answer, I hit the next one. And the odds are 1 out of every 3 places that I could call are not going to answer. And so in that instance, okay, and for those of you who have not listened to previous episodes, I would encourage you to go back and listen to the series on the missing link in your new patient attraction or conversion, right? You know that there is a actual value to each new patient. And so if I'm a new patient and I want to call a practice, but 1 out of 3 offices are just straight up not going to answer the call, which indicates to me that like I'm not a priority, right? Because they're busy, they got things to do, right? They're very busy, very important, right? But 1 out of 3 times, it's like, no, I'm not interested. Well, what does that cost? So if the average office answers 68% of the calls, which means 1 out of every 3 patient calls an office, no one picks up the phone. What is being lost in that practice every single time that happens? There's a very simple formula that you can use to indicate what that is for your office. So if you take the average monthly collections in your practice, or if you have an annual number, great, right? And you divide that by your average monthly new patients, okay? This is going to get you a rough number of the average value of a new patient in your practice. So it's collections divided by new patients, right? If you want to do average monthly collections divided by average monthly new patients, that's fine. If you wanted to do annual divided by annual, also fine. They will get you the same number, okay? And what that is going to give you is the average value of a new patient to your practice. So what that number tells you is this. If that person who makes the time to calls your practice, and somebody answers, and they schedule, and they actually walk through the front door, whatever number you just calculated is what they will spend predictably over time in your practice. So if you're, most dental offices, you're going to find that somewhere between like a $2,000 to a $4,000 number. Okay, so let's call it like a conservative $2,500. All right. And let's do the math of what a higher level of attention does to make sure this is actually effective for you. Because you may say $2,500, right? Who knows? Maybe it's important to you, maybe it's not. But if you do the math and you say, all right, well, if every practice, the average answer rate is 68%, which means 1/3 of the new patients simply don't get the phone picked up, which is a very clear indication of indifference, right? I think I don't think our goal here is a 98% answer rate. So our goal at our office is to answer 98% of all the calls that come in that aren't like spam or junk or whatever, right? And so think about that bridge. 68%, 98%. It's a big difference. Okay. And the most effective offices that we work with, right, they're in that 95, 98% range. We work with some companies who do call tracking analytics, and it's funny. We got a couple of our clients over, and they're working with them, and they're like, "You're not gonna believe it. They handle 1,400 calls a day, and they answer 96% of them." It's like, yeah, that's because they understand how important this is, right? So think about that. Think about if your office had like 1,400 calls. You answered 96% of them. Well, let's take that average value of a new patient and let's play it out. So if your practice, right, let's call it 1,000 calls. So if you had 1,000 calls and you only answered 68% of those, well, that means you're only answering 680, which is leaving 380 possible appointment opportunities. Now, those are not necessarily going to be 100% new patient calls, right? But let's just say like a quarter of them were. So 380 times 0.25, so 95, let's say, conservatively, of those could be new patient opportunities, which we know that if you can get a new patient to walk into the practice for that first visit, right, that average value of a new patient becomes activated, which means all we have to do for them to spend that with your practice over time is actually to get them to just show up for that first visit. So if it's $2,500 per new patient, and you have that practice and you miss 95 new patient calls because you just don't answer the phone, okay? Well, you may say, oh, we just missed 95 calls. Well, you didn't just miss 95 calls. What you lost was $237,000 because of your inattention. Now, why am I starting? I'm like kind of getting a little, we're starting off hot here this week, right? But what I want you to understand is that missing link, that blind spot, is something that is costing practices thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars every single week. And for some reason, I'm one of the only people out there who's just like trying to scream from the rooftops, like, pay more attention, right? And so that is not even when we talk about what's happening on the call and like what we're saying. It's just answering the phone, for God's sakes. So what you need to do, right? So how do you apply this to your practice? How do you apply this to yourself? Okay. Well, if you are a doctor and you own a practice, or you're a doctor and you're looking at owning a practice, or you're a doctor and you work in a practice, right? Any of those people, or you're an office manager, or you're a front desk team member, right? You have to know what your number is. So today with technology, right? Great news is it's pretty easy to find what your answer rate is. So you want to go back today and you want to establish what is your missed call percentage. How many of the calls that are coming into your practice on a weekly basis are getting answered and how many are not, okay? And the first thing you're going to want to do is try and bridge that gap, because no matter where you are, no matter what you're trying to accomplish, if you can move the needle to be more patient-centric in making sure you pick up the phone when the patients call, right? They're going to have a better experience. You're going to be more likely to convert them, and they're not going to move on to the next person on Google as soon as you don't pick up the phone, okay? Now, there's a lot of thoughts out there about how you should do it. The simplest way, just make sure you answer the phone, because on average, the other offices are only picking it up 2 out of 3 times. So if you can even just move it to where you're getting 3 out of 4 times, you're actually already doing pretty significantly better than most other offices out there. And that's how we make our way to elevating the standard in your practice. But why are only 68% of calls answered? Well, it's because no one knows they're not answering the call. It's not because, right? Like, you talk to a doctor and you tell them, on average, people answer 68% of calls. You're like, oh my gosh, why do those team members do that to me? It's not that the team knows this, right? So if you're a team member and you're listening to this, right, even if this was true in your practice, you probably have no idea. You probably don't know. No one has gone and actually done the research to say, hey, ladies, we're missing 30% of the calls that are coming in. What can we do to get creative to bridge that gap, to make sure we have some more coverage, right? How do we prioritize that? Because if we don't, it's going to cost us $240,000 a year, okay? That's the first thing we have to do. Okay, so it's harnessing the power of knowing that metric and then taking action. Okay, so that's the first one, right? The second, and there's really 4 that I want to focus on. So we're going to talk about 4 statistics that you want to track and improve in your practice for better results next month than you had this month. Okay. The second one is the conversion, right? So we talked a little bit about conversion and some of the key questions that get answered on these calls. And again, if you go back to the missing link in your new patient acquisition, it was a 3-episode series. I go into some more depth on this, but what you want to think through is, okay, what are the most common reasons that patients are not converting? When we do pick up the phone, we do answer, what are the most common reasons that they are not converting? Okay. And then that is going to be what you're able to focus on when it comes to conversion. Now, there is a very predictable list of these things, right? And if you want to get your practice assessed on any of this across the scope, right, we have a complimentary assessment. It's the 5-Star Challenge. If you go to schedulinginstitute.com, click on Take the 5-Star Challenge, you can take that assessment. We will actually send you like a whole educational series on how to really better understand what's going on in your practice and what are going to be those levers that you can move to potentially actually recover like that $250,000 a year. So I would highly recommend going and taking the 5-Star Challenge with us. But, to dig into some of the specifics, think about this. If you're converting 42%, right? So let's say we answer 680 new patient phone calls that came in. Well, 42%, so 680 new patient phone calls times 42%, okay, well, it means we're only converting 286. So 680 minus 286, okay, that means you're missing 394. So remember, just on not answering the calls, we're losing like $250,000. Okay. Now, when it comes to the conversion, okay, if we take that average value of 2,500 and you multiply that by the 394 calls that got answered, that got converted out of that 1,000, that's costing almost $1 million. In 1,000 new patient phone calls, if you are operating at the level of the average practice, you are losing roughly $1.2 million in potential practice revenue simply by not answering the new patient call and not having an effective conversion process. Okay. Now, let's take it to the next step, right? Now, this may feel like it's a little bit of a dig, right? But that's how many schedule. That's not how many show up. Okay. We're talking about something like a 25% no-show rate. Okay. So if we take our 680 that we answered, we only convert 42%, leaves us with 286. Okay. So of that 286, what if 30% no-show? Well, that's 87 of those. 87 times that average value of 2,500, it's another $217,000. So if you've been tracking no-shows, if you operate at the average out of 1,000 new patient calls, operating at an average no-show rate, okay, you're losing $217,000. If you're operating at an average conversion rate, you're losing $985,000. And if you're operating at an average answer rate, you're losing, I think it was $237,500, right? So in 1,000 new patient phone calls, by operating at the average levels of a dental practice, you are losing roughly $1.5 million per 1,000 new patient phone calls. Now, if you say, hey, Flint, 1,000 calls, that's so much. We don't even get 1,000 calls. Like, how could that even be true? Well, if you divide it by 10 and you say, okay, well, out of 100 new patient phone calls, then we're losing $145,000 every 100 new patient phone calls by operating at the average. And the first step, right? So now it's, okay, depending on the scope of your practice, how many calls you have coming in, how many new patient calls you have coming in, right? You could be losing $1 million a year. You could be losing $250,000 a year. But the key is understanding where you are starting, because you can't go back and you can't say, oh my gosh, we've been operating at pretty close to the average level for the last 10 years, and so that's cost me $5 million, and I'm just going to sit and like wallow in that sorrow, right? No. This is great news. This is actually all very positive because, look, you now know. Now, maybe you've seen some of these stats before, but I'm hoping that how serious I am taking this and how we're going through the numbers, and maybe you're doing your own math, right? I would actually highly recommend you do, and you'd be able to see some pretty interesting things. But you have to baseline where you're at. So you need to know what's your answer rate, how many new patient phone calls that you're picking up or getting converted into appointments, and how many of those are actually showing up into the practice. Because once we get them there, right, that average value of the new patient activates. Now, once we have the numbers, then we need to set some targets on improvement, okay? Now, there are varying levels of ability and capability and intention when it comes to actually moving the needle, right? So this is something that we've helped thousands and thousands of practices do, is simply moving the needle on those statistics to see dramatic enhancements and improvements in the practice. Now, we've talked a lot about the cost to the practice, okay? But now let's talk about the other audiences. So if you're the practice owner and you say, oh my gosh, that's costing me $1 million every 1,000 new patient phone calls, like that hurts, right? But you have to consider also, if you're a team member, how does this impact you? Well, if you're sitting there today and you're like, man, I'd really like to have more opportunity in this practice, or I'd really like to have a path for growth where you're working, right? Well, being able to serve another 400 new patients, another 200 new patients, that's going to bring in that revenue into the practice. That's where opportunity is created. Opportunity is created in a practice that's growing. Opportunity does not come to places that are stagnant, to places that are not focused on best serving the customer and your customer being the patient. And so if you think about the third audience of the patient, well, okay, if I'm a patient and I need dental work and I call a dental office, isn't the best possible outcome for me to have someone answer the phone, answer my questions, get me scheduled, get me to show up, get me the care that I need so that I can walk out feeling better, looking better, whatever it is that I want that day or need that day? Yeah. So while we may be talking about some KPIs at the front end of your business, the trickle effect of taking this more seriously, establishing your starting position, and setting some targets around improvement or getting some outside help to improve those numbers, right, has a great ripple effect on the profitability of the business, the opportunity for the team members, and the experience that we're delivering to the patients. Okay, that is what we are doing here. And that is how, the danger of this is saying, well, Flint, there's these 17 other KPIs that I really think are super important. Well, if you look at those KPIs and you ask yourself, will any of those KPIs happen if a patient never walks through the front door? Is your average case acceptance rate going to be affected if the patient never comes in? Is the reappointment rate going to be affected if the patient never comes in the first time? Is your hourly hygiene production going to be positively affected if the patient never walks in the front door? No. None of those things happen if we don't get this right. But the draw is to go focus on those things because that's where you're at. The patient's in the chair. They're in the office. You're with them. You're talking to them, right? They're like face to face. But at one point, they were in that moment. At one point, they pulled out their phone. At one point, they Googled best dentist near me. And they found you. And they clicked on you. Or they were referred to you and they clicked on you. And somebody answered the phone. And got them to understand they called the right place. And that set in motion all of the things that maybe you care about more, but you need to be focusing here. Because it makes a huge difference. And so, really, that's what I wanted to get across to you today. That's what I really wanted you to understand this week is really just go back, figure out what's your answer rate, what's your new patient appointment schedule rate, and then what is your new patient no-show rate? And how can we move the needle in those three numbers and just watch what happens to the rest of the practice? And I promise you, you will like what you see. Have a fantastic rest of your week. If there's anything we can do to help you move the needle, reach out to us. Would love to work with you guys in the future. See you next time.